I read The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire by Karen Eber. This is the first time I've read this book. This is a kind of guidebook or how-to book for executive level working people in the economy. I don't know how else to say that. It's kind of aimed at business people, I guess, at the executive level is what I mean. I bought this book because it was on sale. I didn't seek it out or anything. And so it's a work of nonfiction, but I don't know Karen Ebert. I've never read any of her other stuff. She talks in the book about what her business is about, which is helping executives to learn how to use storytelling in their leadership and business practices to kind of maximize communication within their company and work better with their customers and partners and things like that. So like this is her profession that she is writing the book about. Like a lot of kind of self-help how to business executive style books, the structure of this book has worksheets with it or like action plans, goal sheets. It's broken down in a way so that you can only read certain parts if you want to. You don't have to read the entire book. Business people are really into that from like my own experience of working with them. I'm like a working class guy. I'm not executive level person, but they always like it when you quote unquote don't waste time and just get to the important part. And the book facilitates that kind of thinking. She says, like turn to this page if that's what you're into, turn to this page if you have experience with this already, so you skip that, or you can read the whole thing however you want to do it. And so I think it would be really easy to kind of like skip to the end of any given chapter, look at the summation of the big ideas, big points, and get a sense of what that part is about. And then if you wanted to dig deeper on whatever that subject is, then you could like just read that one chapter and it would help you to like figure out what was that one part that she was saying and kind of refresh yourself just by looking at those small summaries within the book. I think that's the idea of what she's doing. She talks about that she has given TED Talks and the ways that she has gone to various companies and helped people with their storytelling. She begins the book by telling a story that she breaks down throughout the rest of the book, illustrating the sources of her story, the ways in which she built the story, and the different ways that maybe the story could be told differently to achieve different effects, which is a useful tool and demonstrates her capability in storytelling. So it would be really hard for her, I think, to get away with not telling a story in this book, given her claim on being a storytelling expert. She kind of has to. And she tells a few different stories throughout the book. And I think I'm wrong. Like the very first story that she tells is a different one than the story that I'm thinking of, where she talks about having heterochromia, where your eyes are two different colors, and not liking the way that people kept asking her about it. And so eventually she made up a story, an absurd story about how when she was really young, she ate a whole bunch of crayons that were green, and doing this turned one of her eyes green. And then that got people to stop asking her the question because it was such a surprising answer and just kind of made them laugh. And for her, it felt like she took some agency back in the situation and made her less self-conscious about how people were reacting to this thing about the color of her eyes. And because it gave her some agency back, that kind of like is the thing that she says is, her origin story for this is when I realized how useful storytelling could be and how powerful it is. And so the story that she breaks down throughout the book is about this woman who comes to work and she drops her cell phone when she gets into the elevator, and it kind of like slips into the crack of the door before the doors close. And then she can hear it like hit the floor below them. And when she looks in the crack, she can see that the light of the screen is still on. So it didn't break the phone, but she's not going to be able to get to it, obviously. And then she goes and tells her friend, who is like the security guard and maintenance type guy. And he figures out a way to get it back for her for free because they're friends. And that this story is kind of composed of two different stories, one that she lived through and a kind of legend about a famous businessman who his final exam in business school was that he had to name the lady who cleaned the garbage cans every night in the schoolroom, and he couldn't do it. And that the professor said that like this was really important that you learn the people who you think don't matter because they are essential to making your company work. And then he swore from that point on he would always learn everybody's name and learn about them and take that into account. And so she combines this message of needing to learn about the little people, I guess, and her friend who dropped her cell phone down the elevator to create a kind of parable that has a really strong effect for executives, I guess. That story kind of put a bad taste in my mouth right away when I read it because it feels a little instrumentalizing in how relationships work, but maybe this is just how executive level business people think. I don't know. So it's, be friends with people just in case you ever need a favor from them kind of mentality. I'm sure that she doesn't mean it that way. It's just how that story struck me. And it's being a working class person, it just like prioritizes or sees the lady with the phone as a full person and the security guy as a useful person to her. It felt like, I don't know. So I wasn't thrilled with the story, but I could recognize the way in which it was well constructed. It was very well told. It was compelling. I still remember it. And so it does all of the things that she talks about in the book that have to do with the power of storytelling and how it can help people to retain information, to get your message across to them, and that it's the best way to transmit information when you're trying to communicate with people. And this is a big problem in the business world nowadays. I mean, more and more, it's more and more of a problem, right? Like everything is data driven, all kinds of charts and numbers. It's a little bit mind numbing. And then there's a tendency to do kind of corporate speak where we're, synergizing and hacking and blah, 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 ROI go up, blah, 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 blah. Like it all just kind of washes over you and you don't really hear what the people are saying. And so to bring it back down to like kind of a human level, tell a human level story, and then use that to illustrate whatever the point is in the business meeting is a really effective strategy for bringing people back into the reason that they probably got into business in the first place, which I guess money might be the main reason, but probably the secondary reason is because of, human driven purpose, that we care about other people. We want to build businesses and institutions that make meaningful changes in the people's lives around us and improve things for everyone. And so bringing the focus back to that in order to deliver the information that is vital for running businesses and whatnot is probably the best way to do that. She talks about science-driven information that has to do with scanning people's brains when they like read a story out loud and then have other people listen to that story being read out loud and scanning those people's brains, and the brains match up. Like the parts of the brain that are being lit up by the person who is telling the story and the parts that are hearing the story match each other, which is another way of saying that storytelling is a kind of telepathy, or it's a very powerful way to engage another person's mind in order to align people with a vision, which is a crucial capability of top level executives. Leaders of a team need their team to be aligned in the vision of the leader. And so this is a science kind of proven way to achieve that goal. I think this kind of demonstrates the way that this is a powerful skill that she's offering in the book, that there's concrete evidence, and that a lot of times people think of storytelling as being one of these soft humanities, kind of useless skills. You go to school, like I went to school as an English major. I know a lot of philosophy. And when I talk to people at my job who are at the executive level about things like that, there's an immediate kind of like dialing out. Their eyes go dead. They roll their eyes. They look away. Because all of those things, I can remember when I went to college, people saying to me, like, don't do that. It's a useless skill. You'll never get a job. It won't help you in your life, blah, 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 like that. And so going to school and getting a business degree, you're focusing in on the STEM skills, the mathematics especially, and those tend to minimize the humanities types of knowledge where we're looking at systems holistically instead of looking for, the relationship, a one-to-one relationship of we put in this much capital and we got out this much profit. English major type people tend to like look at whole systems instead of just those fine-tuned relationships. And that feels to business people like kind of a waste of time. But here in the book, she's showing the way that it's not a waste of time and that it makes a huge difference in delivering the message that needs to be heard by the employees and helps to focus and align leadership with their employees as well. So in other words, it makes teams stronger. It can help, with marketing, with grabbing new clients, with delivering the message of the company to the public, and on and on and on. There's endless ways in which storytelling can be useful for practicing business, which again, I was an English major. This isn't news to me, but it is gratifying to see the business world acknowledge it, I guess, and to find some value in it that isn't purely about profit, but is actually about making the types of human connections, that while they facilitate better business, also draw us together more as a human community, I think. So I think even though I am an English major, I've been studying storytelling for decades now, and I've read lots of books on the subject. This book still had things in it that I found useful and valuable, but also would, I think, be a really good book for somebody who hasn't read anything about storytelling and has no experience with it whatsoever. So it's a very approachable book. It's extremely well thought out. It is, like I said, it has the whole kind of worksheet format to it, the chapter summaries at the end. There's a good outline at the beginning of it, kind of saying if you want this goal, then look at this part of the book. If you have this goal, look at this part. So the book is really for anybody who's interested in storytelling at all, no matter what level of experience, which is an accomplishment, I think, for Karen Eber. The other thing that has to do with neurology that she talks about is the reasons why we get bored. and that the brain has a tendency to try and predict situations, and that this can be, kind of surprising news to people who don't understand how storytelling works. And so you don't want to tell a kind of tried and true plot or use cliches, because then the brain anticipates what is going to happen and doesn't really listen to the rest of the message, just kind of tunes out. And so the reasons why we get bored at meetings is because stories either kind of meander and don't seem to have a point, and therefore there's no reason to pay attention to them, or they follow very predictable patterns that we already understand and don't need to fully dial into. And so the story where the woman drops her phone down the elevator shaft has all kinds of surprising elements to it and little memorable things that aren't typical in that kind of like business setting style story. And so, she uses it over and over in the book as an example of how to do a good job with storytelling. I don't know how likely I am to come back to the book. It was a little bit longer than I would have expected given everything, but like I said, she does pack a lot of information in there for people of all different kinds of levels of knowledge and capability around the subject. So it seemed to be as long as it needed to be. And typically I reread stuff again and again to try and pick everything out of it that I can. It's interesting to read a, like how do stories work type of book from someone who is not a professional storyteller per se, like an author, screenwriter, things like that, but a business person who tells stories to other business people is something unique that I haven't run into before. And it's interesting the things that she values and the ways that she approaches storytelling that are a little bit outside of the box compared to professional creative people that typically write books about storytelling. So there's a lot in there that's different if you're used to this kind of genre, I guess is what I'm saying.